webinar for y'all. Really appreciate your attendance. I know you could be anywhere right now and you're here with us, and we really appreciate your time. We have an exciting program ahead of us. So it's going to be 45-minute presentation followed by 15 minutes Q&A, and we'll get started in about 2 more minutes. So thank you again, and I look forward to spending the next hour with y'all. All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody. We have an exciting program for the next hour with y'all, the VBC and Innovation Driven Pharma webinar. It's going to be segmented into 2 pieces, 45-minute presentation, followed by a 15-minute Q&A. If you have any questions during the presentation part, go ahead and type it in the Q&A. We'll also have a couple poll questions throughout the presentation as well. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. If I can move my screen. So I think everyone in the audience is pretty aware with fee-for-service. It's what we know today as the most prominent payment model. It's traditionally dominated the healthcare landscape in terms of reimbursement, and it still does. And I still think it will for quite some time in the foreseeable future. It's widely acknowledged, however, that the fee-for-service model rewards volume and intensity of services. It's widely seen as the underlying driver for the skyrocketing cost of healthcare over the past 30 years. And it does have pros. You know, it's not all cons. It's easy to track. It's efficient administratively. It's a one-to-one output. It's easier to forecast. The infrastructure is in place for payment. People do what they're incentivized to do. People do what they're reimbursed for, and the fee-for-service has been the cleanest model thus far. What's exciting today is an alternative payment model that is slowly forming and evolving, but more and more you're hearing about it. People either refer to it as a value-based arrangement, a value-based agreement, a value-based contract, or a value-based care. And value-based care encompasses performance-based payments or reimbursement tied to indicators of value, such as patient health outcomes, efficiency, and quality. So it's not just about utilization. It's not just about volume, but there's a quality component matched with the quantity component. I think it's important, super important to the industry because it creates a mutually binding agreement between parties or stakeholders to achieve important performance goals, to collaborate on delivering these goals in practice and sharing the benefits or adhering to the penalties if the goals aren't achieved. It's less transactional, it's less short-term, and it really involves a relationship. It really involves trust, it involves transparency, it involves sharing of data, integration of systems. Short-term, it's harder to solve. I don't think there's any question about that. But long-term, I think it will reduce the inflation of the healthcare and it will improve the patient experience. In terms of how the National Pharmaceutical Council defines VBCs or VBAs, they call them value-based contracts. So they're thinking still in that contractual mode, which is fine. A lot of people do. My background is as an attorney. When you're deep in the trenches, the contractual provisions certainly matter. But I think it's important to get the business case right and the business provisions and alignment between the business stakeholders. I think we all know the benefits. We all know why it's important. I really want to focus on the challenges today. I think this would be what would be meaningful and consequential for the audience. But in terms of benefits, VBCs reduce payers' risk based on suboptimal purchases. They can provide earlier access to biopharmaceuticals for patients and consumers. They offer a more efficient pricing mechanism, or they can. and they can serve as a catalyst for generating enhanced real-world medical evidence. We know farmers can use VBCs to differentiate and demonstrate the effectiveness of their products as they're looking for commercialization, market access, go-to-market fit, product market fit. And it can assist payers in making formulary or other reimbursement decisions. Payers can utilize value-based contracts to gain experience with the product, to test out a product, to do an evaluation, have an evaluation period, or do a proof of concept, or do a study or a trial. And this reduces uncertainty regarding clinical value, performance, and financial impact. But there are challenges. There's significant payer and provider infrastructure needed and necessary to monitor an outcomes-based agreement. I certainly have war stories from not having the proper infrastructure in place. Manufacturers are reluctant to accept financial consequences when they can't control every part of the supply chain or how a drug beyond the pill solution is prescribed or used. And agreeing upon the outcomes that are meaningful and measurable within a reasonable time frame is challenging. And I'll double click on a couple of these concepts throughout the presentation. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the Q&A box. Do you want to throw up the first poll question, Fayla? In terms of the first poll question, I hope you can see it on your screen, but certainly ping us in the Q&A if you cannot. Which of the 6 stakeholders is the hardest to engage with or convince that an alternative payment model, like a value-based care arrangement, is worth pursuing in the short term? I was recently at a webinar, attended a webinar, and they talked about the 5 Cs, and I thought it was a great framing mechanism. The patient, the payer, the provider, the plan sponsor, and policy personnel. Today, I want to talk about the 6 Ps, pharma. I don't think a lot of people think about pharma as part of the business stakeholders in VBC. Historically, they haven't been, especially when we're talking about pill initiatives or molecule initiatives. You will see over the last maybe 5 to 7 years, a handful of VBC purely in the molecule space. But when I was at Blue Cross North Carolina, we launched VBC pilot programs in diabetes, tobacco cessation, non-emergency medical transportation, medically tailored meals, maternity models, oncology, orthopedic, MSK, CKD, ESRD, specialty care. But my one regret was we were never able to engage pharma on a meaningful VBC initiative. I don't know if we lacked the relationships, or we lacked the connections, or lacked a specific concrete use case to drill upon, but we were never able to enter into a VBC with a pharma. I think one of the exciting things in today's landscape is these beyond the pill initiatives, these companion apps, these combination products, these software as a medical device, these digital wrappers to an existing molecule or existing solution that pharmas have that really provide a neat opportunity to discuss alternative payment models such as value-based care. Fayla, did everyone get to vote? It's a really a neat breakdown. I don't know if you can see it on the screen. I hope you can. But payer and pharma were the top 2 chosen as the hardest to engage or convince for a value-based care arrangement. And I think that's right. I think that's right. I come from a payer background. Again, currently I'm the Director of Partnerships, Deputy General Counsel here at Medullan. But prior to this, I was at Blue Cross Blue Shield, North Carolina on the Healthcare Strategy and Transformation team. We focus exclusively on digital health programs and pilots based on alternative payment reimbursement like value-based care. So thank you very much for answering that. It was very interesting to see. We did a workshop the other day, or one of our consulting teams did at Medullan, and I thought this quote was just great as we we further discussed value-based care. It's one component across all these VBC solutions is the integrated medicine and the solution you're talking about to reduce the dependencies on biologics for the volume game. That's how you get a value-based model that shifts shared savings or risk over to the provider or brings others with skin in the game into the reimbursement. And I think we'll be talking about that more and more. But I did want to start with that quote because I think it lays a meaningful foundation for what we're going to review today. In terms of some nomenclature, I think it's helpful to understand, different industries, different stakeholders have different dictionaries, different words they use. Today, when we talk about fee for service, we're going to talk, it's just a traditional method based on volume. Outcome performance-based is paying for performance. I think you know the rest, payer, pharma provider. There's per enrolled member per month. That's a payment mechanism. It's a little more sophisticated, often tied to a capitation contract or a risk-sharing contract. We'll get into that more. There's per member per month based on a population cohort. There's bundle payment, episode of care. That's one value-based care model. There's shared savings. That's another. Both of those are on more of the mature aspect of value-based care arrangements, but we'll get into that as well. There's shared risk, the next level of risk arrangements, total cost of care, agreed upon sum for the cost of service condition, and value-based care agreements or contracts, VBAs or VBCs. I'll probably use the term VBC throughout, but you could use VBA just the same. I think it's always hard to align on nomenclature because even value, the term value and value-based care means different things to different stakeholders. As mentioned, I went to a webinar recently, and Jim Grana, the Chief Contract and Network Development at Rush Health, said payers, who you mentioned, one of the hardest to engage with, have a parade of people coming through to sell them. That certainly was my experience at Blue Cross. Ideally, your pitch contains an outcome study that has already been done or collaborating on an outcome study. And I think when you're rolling out a new program, when you're talking about market access, when you're trying to find use cases for product market fit, I think that's exactly the right concept. Can you start with a specific pilot? And then how are you thinking of the 6 Ps of stakeholders? How are you thinking about the patient? I think in these models, what's exciting to me is the tools, the data analytics, and the infrastructure needed for value-based care often revolves around the patient. The patient is critical or the heart of any of these programs, and I think that's neat. I don't think that's always the case in fee-for-service models. But again, I might be a little biased. Then there's the payer. What do they value? What's their ROI? What's their timeline? The provider, the plan sponsor, the policymaker, and here I added pharma. Because I think if you are a digital builder in pharma, VBC is very important to you. You see where the puck is going. You see your competitors differentiating their products, their digital solutions through an alternative payment model like value-based care. They're taking on risk. They're guaranteeing performance, or they're going to get penalized, or they're going to share in some of these performance or outcomes measures. I don't see those personnel in the pharma who are just dabbling in the digital space really focused on value-based care. I think value-based care as an element in a next-gen patient support program, in a Beyond the Pill initiative. I don't see it as much for a traditional molecule plan because historically it's never been the case. It hasn't gained much traction with pharma for molecule reimbursement. Again, that could change. Just from the data points I've collected, the people I've talked to, it doesn't seem like it's a focus area for pharma. However, in the digital solutions and the digital programs they're coming up with, I think it is a very much a large focus. And a lot of our conversations when we get into these engagements between pharma and payers, pharma and IDNs or integrated delivery networks, pharma and health systems, VBC comes up quite a bit, a lot more than it did just even a year or two ago. So again, the webinar I went to was based on those 5 P stakeholders. I wanted to add the 6 pharma, and that's all it talked about. Today we're going to talk bit more about digital and how it is married to VBC, or how it integrates with VBC, or how it can be considered a complementary component of a digital solution program. So again, remember, when you're talking about the 6 Ps, they all have different priorities, different values, different time horizons, and different ROI requirements. And we know there's a lot of legacy behaviors. There's a lot of grandfathered habits, and it's hard to change. So oftentimes when we talk about digital, we talk about value-based care, we talk about the data required, the infrastructure required. But I think there's not enough focus on the behavioral change aspect of it amongst the 6 stakeholders. I think that's important to keep in mind. When I was at Blue Cross North Carolina, it was our goal, and the New York Times covered it in 2019, to move the majority of our lines of business, the majority of our revenue, to at-risk models. It's a value-based care arrangement. It was a really exciting time to be there. The New York Times covered it. We had a lot of national coverage. We were considered the blueprint for many of our value-based care or alternative payment model agreements. I have a lot of war stories as well, a lot of pilots and programs that died a million deaths before we finally launched. But I do want to say my biggest regret is we were never able to do a VBC with a pharma. But I'm hopeful, because I do think pharma, y'all in the audience, are coming to the table as you're thinking about these beyond the pill initiatives. And I do see partnerships being inked in the space, whereas a couple of years ago, you could just name the handful that existed out there. And you were never really sure if it was successful or not, because you never heard the debrief or the autopsy or the status update. You saw the initial presser, and then you never heard about it again. So I'm still interested on some of these VBC use cases that have been inked recently or a couple of years ago. Just this week, Healthcare Intelligence came out with a Blue Cross Blue Shield North Carolina story talking about how they're approaching value-based care best practices. And I thought this was just very timely and topical. I think it provides a good analog to understand how payers and providers are thinking about the space, because pharma can map on quite succinctly here. So when we talk about value-based care, I want you guys to think about, it's not an all-in approach. It's a phased approach. And I think this is a good analog for some recommendations or tips. So it's not as transactional. It's about the relationship. Focus on it, nurture it. You need to truly respect each other's roles of whatever counterparty or strategic partner you're working with. You're creating a partnership from the person's perspective as well as a financial and business perspective. You're empathizing and understanding goals and constraints. You have to be willing to bend a little. You can use the pandemic as a time to build trust and collaborate. I think when I was with the payer at the very beginning of COVID-19, we had to take a step back and really think about how we approach value-based care. Did we need to pause on the benchmarks? Did we need to pause on the metrics? Did we need to pause on the data collection? Did the first year need to be fee for service before we went into a value-based care arrangement? Did the first 2 years need to be fee for service before we went into a value-based care arrangement? Identify small wins to build common ground. Start with a specific initiative. Pilot new programs. Success breeds success to celebrate success. At Blue Cross, we often said it's giving the right care to the right person at the right time, and enable shared decision making. For example, if there are opportunities for improvement within the patient population, let the clinical team on the provider side decide where to start. We've done that quite a bit over the last year. We just did a VBC engagement in the Caribbean, and we worked hand in glove with the clinical team to decide which patient population to start with. In terms of the phased approach, rather than making the risky decision to go all in on VBC, choose a phased transition. Focus solutions addressing immediate needs, early wins and ROI, internal support and adoption, and strong payer, provider, pharma relationships and alignment on VBC and clinical goals. Pilot programs with willing providers, pharma, payers that are refined before expanding to the fuller provider network. I'm on several engagements where we're starting with a smaller pilot program. I can think of a few in the Medicaid population that I'm excited about, but we're going after a specific cohort before we roll it out to the full population. In terms of understanding a little bit more about the nomenclature or how we define VBC, when people say VBC, it's quite a nebulous concept. I often ask, what do you mean? You could mean pay for performance, pay for coordination, reimbursement based on bundles or episodes of care, shared savings program, upside downside risk, and capitation partial or full, or global payment, such as a labor and delivery payment. I think where CMS is right now, where the digital health space is right now, where pharma is right now, we're on the lower end of the spectrum. We're mainly focused on the pay for performance model. I think that still hasn't been nailed. I think most of the opportunity is there. I think even when you look at payer-provider relationships, they're still in that pay for performance model. And that's okay. I think any of these arrangements as an alternative payment model are an improvement upon the typical volume and intensity of services we know as fee for service. So the pay for performance model offers a direct and simple approach to reimbursement, linking payments to quality and value. I think adding that quality and value to the quantity of services is important, it's critical. Providers are reimbursed using the fee-for-service structure. However, they are incentivized to meet certain quality and efficiency performance measures. You can remove providers and put in any other stakeholder there for this exercise. So I think it's important to understand VBC has a lot of different connotations, a lot of different definitions, but it's a spectrum. What I have found, and this is from the Center for Healthcare Quality and Payment Reform, and let me check on time, okay, it's about halfway through, that there's 4 core components of any VBC program: the payment for services, the reimbursement. How are you accountable for spending? How are you accountable for quality? And how are you choosing the patient population in the VBC program? I think underlying, and I added this arrow over the top, is the data sharing and infrastructure. I think it's very important to get that right. I've been on a few engagements in my prior life where we didn't have the data sharing infrastructure necessarily down before we entered into the pilot, and we had to kind of build the plane in flight, and that was a fun experience to say the least. 2 common denominators of any VBC program is that focus on improvement of quality of care and the reduction of total cost of care. Aspirationally, I think we always want to talk about the quadruple aim of healthcare and target that. So 1, better outcomes; 2, lower costs; 3, improve the patient experience; and 4, improve the clinical experience. We know in the United States that clinician burnout is plaguing the industry. How can your solution improve that? How can your CDS or clinical decision support tool improve the clinical experience? All are very important. I think the best programs target all 4. Again, when we talk about VBC, we're going from a nebulous concept and we're trying to really piece apart the initiatives or piece apart the maturity spectrum, where people are. Even in payer providers, when you hear VBC, it's not always this population-based payment. That's the most mature aspect of VBC. It's often a hybrid between the fee-for-service, that category 1 model, into linking to quality and value. So it's a 1, 2, 3-year transition. It's a 5-year engagement, but you're always using fee-for-service as a foundation because it's your benchmark of what you're comparing it against. But a lot of fees, a lot of payments still are attached to that element of fee-for-service. You don't have to go all in. You can put your toe in the water and slowly walk into the deep end. Then you can talk about pay for performance, pay for care pathways, shared savings and shared risk. Very few digital health programs are actually taking part of the downside, sharing the risk. If something costs more, do they have to then give back? Not to say there aren't programs out there, there certainly are, but they're in the minority. When we talk about VBC, when the industry talks about VBC, CMS talks about VBC, it's mainly focused on that paying for performance. Instead of just paying for volume intensity of services, you're paying for outcomes measures, times in the programs, engagement, NPS, enrollment. So again, whether you're talking about performance and quality of care, total cost of care, patient experience, clinician experience, it doesn't matter, but you're starting to leave that fee-for-service model. You're starting to evolve. You're starting to mature in the space. And so it's important to kind of see how payers and providers are working together so you can create the analog for how you're building the digital solution. Again, this is a step approach, category 1, category 2, category 3, category 4. I would say 80% of VBC models I've seen I've come across and instructed are focused in category 2. A little in category 3, not a lot at all in category 4. And so when we're talking about just the initial construct, where do you start? When you find a willing, engaged, strategic partner, you create mutual beneficial goals. Are those goals aligned? Are your values aligned? Is your ROI aligned? Is your time period aligned? You agree to the benchmarks and metrics. You align performance incentives and penalties. And if you're in the most mature space, the capitation contracts, you go into shared benefits and savings. You go into shared losses and risk. Meaning if the system, if the provider is more profitable, they share some of that revenue with you. Or are they more limiting the scope to you're going to get paid based on certain performance metrics? And that's what we see mostly right now. A lot of this is easy to say, it's simple to understand, but it's hard to execute in terms of the primary principles. As mentioned, the goals, the benchmarks, the benefits, the losses. But there's a lot of supporting activities that are required. This is what we often give short shrift to. This is what ends up taking a lot of time when you think you're going to have first patient or participant in a pilot on July 1st. It takes till December, and before you know it, you have teams working over Christmas to get the pilot up and running because you didn't focus enough on the data and analytics, the cost curve, the total cost of care, the quality and clinical metrics, incentives and penalties, and the infrastructure. So these supporting activities are definitely non-trivial and are a material part of any program. And again, I think when a lot of people talk and discuss value-based care, they talk about the benefits and importance. They don't necessarily talk about the challenges. They don't talk about all the roadblocks, all the speed bumps. Having been in the trenches on a number of programs, those speed bumps can become roadblocks in a hurry. So when you think about your target and when you think about VBC, you don't have to target that next level of risk where you're sharing in the risk. You can just target shared savings. You can target bundles, payments, episodes of care, or you can target that pay for performance, the performance-based payment. A lot of the digital solutions that have come in out there in their programs for VBC, alternative payment model, they focus just on time in the program. They believe if someone is engaged and is enrolled and engaged in the program, that there's going to be benefits to that. They're going to prove it in their evaluation or in their proof of concept, but their metrics or their milestones are specifically time-based only. You get that enrollment fee, you get a payment for being 3 months in the program, 6 months in the program, 9 months in the program, and 12 months in the program. And you can repeat that for a 2-year cycle if that's what's desired between the parties. So again, I think you got to think about the maturity spectrum and where you're really targeting, at least to start. I really wanted to talk about this use case because this IDEO article, I believe, came out yesterday or earlier this week, and because I think digital therapeutics, digital health, digital medicine is right for value-based care. Digital therapeutics offers a wildly different version of the patient experience, an opportunity to redefine medicine, and a forcing function for pioneering entirely new business models. When they say that, new business models, I think value-based care. I think about that alternative payment model. I think about adding that VBC as that differentiator. to a wildly different patient experience. And that to me is what's exciting about value-based care, and I think why you guys attended today. The next era of digital health has arrived and it's booming. In the not too distant future, patients with COPD could be equipped with a sensor that monitors their medication and inhaler use and prevents acute events. People suffering from clinical depression could be described an app-based therapeutic program in place of a drug. That to me is super exciting as we're thinking about an omni-channel approach in engaging the participant, the patient. Really reimagining the front door to healthcare. Instead of infrequent in-person visit, you're going to have much more frequent touch points, and those visits can be virtual. And that to me is super exciting. The industry has aligned on the digital health, digital medicine, digital therapeutics definition. I think the DTX Alliance has done a really good job defining that. But again, when someone talks to me about digital health, digital medicine, digital therapeutics, I always want to level set and align. What do you mean by that? Are you talking about a digital diagnostic or biomarker? Or are you actually talking about an intervention, a program that treats the disease, that manages the disease, that aims to improve the health function? Or are you just talking about a general health and wellness play? Again, there's a lot of similar components, but some require a lot more regulatory compliance and quality understanding. We're seeing trailblazers in the space. Oftentimes, people think SAMD might be different than DTX. DTX, or digital therapeutics, are often regulated as a software as a medical device, either by the IMDRF or by FDA. But it's good to get a fundamental understanding of the digital regulations in place, whether you're talking about a 510K, de novo, or breakthrough device. So one, we're talking about the categorization of digital programs, but two, reimbursement is, again, a shoulder-to-shoulder importance of how we think about the program that you're looking to launch, that you're looking to gain market access for. So we just wrote a comment letter based on breakthrough devices because it's great. You're classifying all these devices for expedited review, but you're not giving any different reimbursement channel. You're not evolving the reimbursement channel. You're forcing these breakthrough devices that may be digital to seek reimbursement through durable medical equipment. So it's this odd fit of how you're trying to tie reimbursement, old reimbursement pathways, traditional pathways, into new devices, new programs, breakthrough initiatives. With technology, with innovation, legislation is always a little bit behind, but hopefully through our conversations together and through the work we do together, we can affect policy changes at the state and fed level. And again, when I talk about digital builders in the pharma space, we are seeing pharma companies like yourself take a step into the pool. We're seeing partnerships being inked. We're seeing a lot of M&A activity. We're seeing a lot of investments in the space. So I know that it's important. There's value-based care, value-based arrangement is just a component of this larger umbrella of Beyond the Pill initiative. And seeing these data points is very exciting. Also seeing what you're doing in the diabetes space, that's a space, therapeutic area, chronic condition I spent quite a bit of time, but we're seeing pharma also work with IDNs, with payers, providers in the system. One I want to call out here that I thought was really neat and something I tried to get underway but was unsuccessful is this time in range concept. So how often is a participant in the agreed upon time and range for their blood sugar? And I think that is a very sophisticated metric for VBC. So I would say that's the most mature metric. You have VBC models. We have VBC models where every 6 months the patient or participant had to go to a lab to get an HbA1c reading versus just doing it at home or having a CGM attached. So even in the last 3 years, this space has evolved quite a bit. You can see there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat. You can focus on net promoter score and the HbA1c reading. You can focus on the percent of patients achieving the blood sugar values or HbA1c. You can focus on total cost of care with this per member per month model. So a lot of different ways, definitely a different spectrum of maturity across VBC programs. We often get in conversations with startups or with device medical products that are trying to collect a million different data points. And sometimes it's hard to separate the signal from the noise or to filter that. And this McKinsey report 2021 had 6 interconnected attributes to work together to define a great digital health business. I wanted to focus on here, we're seeing 75% of the data-based business models are based on self-reported data, a daily survey, a check-in, a how do you feel? It's not necessarily always about this super advanced AI, ML, digital biomarker, never been collected before, first time ever. It's oftentimes remembering the basics and having self-reported data in whatever program you're trying to build for your companion app, for your combination product, for your SAMD. So I just wanted to remind everybody that something as easy as that daily survey, the weekly check-in, the monthly touch point can be just as meaningful as the most advanced data points that are being collected in your program. Another consulting company that I attended, Eversana, had this asset. I thought this was a wonderful asset to think about market access, whether you're thinking about business to business, business to consumer, or business to payer, and whether you're thinking about programmatic spend versus claim-based reimbursement. How important is FDA clearance, prescription, clinical evidence? I would say in all these initiatives, you have to have the clinical evidence. You don't necessarily have to have the FDA clearance to have the conversation about your digital health medicine or therapeutic product or solution. I would caution here in terms of programmatic spend, I have done programmatic spend programs that involve claims-based reimbursement. I didn't necessarily require what is mentioning that's required here. So again, they kind of separate programmatic spend from claim-based reimbursement, but I've done programmatic spend with claims-based reimbursement based on newly created HCPCS codes. So again, they separate programmatic spend versus claims-based system. I think it's a good way to think about it. Are you looking in terms of your fee-for-service model to go after programs, or are you looking to get that general national type of reimbursement? Again, to begin, I'd go for both on the fee-for-service model. What makes value-based care neat and different is that you don't have to necessarily fall in either. So you don't have to fall in that prescription category or that DME category. You can work with the payer counterparty on developing your own payment model, whether it involves claims or not for reimbursement. It doesn't always have to involve claims. A lot of the startups or products I work with were still billing on invoice as they were working on their claims configuration, on their claims processing capabilities. So again, when you think about your digital solution in terms of fee-for-service reimbursement, there's no third category right now. There's that pharmacy benefit, which digital therapeutics are called PDT, prescription digital therapeutics, or that DME space when you're looking for that reimbursement, the durable medical equipment. What makes value-based care compelling is it doesn't necessarily have to fall in either. It provides a tertiary pathway or an alternative way to get reimbursed. You don't have to fall under that DME or that RX spend. You can create your own category, your own alternative payment model for reimbursement. You can get reimbursed based on enrollment, based on time in the program, based on HbA1c, based on COPD metrics, based on sleep metrics, based on health and wellness initiatives. Whatever clinical measures that the parties deem to be important, you can get reimbursed for, and that's pretty neat. So that's kind of flipping this reimbursement model on its side. So a lot of, I wanted to talk about PDTs a little today. It is newer. We're seeing more and more trailblazers enter the space. A lot of people understand SAMDs getting reimbursed through the DME route. the durable medical equipment route. It's a very mature space. If you're going for fee for service, I think there's a general understanding of that. But this prescription digital therapeutics is a brand new space. So again, if you're looking for formulary coverage or digital formulary coverage for a fee for service model, I think it's important to understand the prescription digital therapeutics universe. Again, once you understand the fee for service concept, whether it's DME, whether it's RX, whether it's CDT, then you can map on your value-based care arrangement. The best programs that I've encountered that we've been able to shop to payers often have, or always have, the fee for service and the value-based care. And the payer can then decide how to pay or reimburse or enter that pilot or program. And that could it often matures. It could start fee for service and move to value-based care as the players, as the stakeholders build that relationship, as transparency enters the space, as data use agreements, data sharing agreements get signed, as the infrastructure is able to integrate. So it's important to think about that as a roadmap, as a phased approach. With PDT, we are seeing a rigor of evidence, not necessarily required for all other digital health initiatives. But even with PDT, not all of them are going through RCT, 27% here. And 48% of PDT companies have conducted RCTs for at least one of their products. So about 1 in 4 you're seeing in PDT is going through an RCT. This is a little bit more about the pyramid. Some of these assets are from the Health Excel Exits and Outcomes PDT report. If you haven't seen that yet, highly recommend it. If you haven't got a chance to view it, it's a great report. So as you're building your digital health solution and you're thinking about reimbursement, it's important to understand what level of clinical evidence do you need to generate. Oftentimes, it's not at that RCT level. It's not the same evidence required for a molecule or a pill. Okay, about a couple minutes. Again, this is to think about all the stakeholders, but at the end of the day, I think the tools, the data analytics, everything that a VBC program entails in a digital health program should be patient-centric, keeping the patient at the heart of the program. In the last couple minutes, a lot of people talk about the advantages of VBC, the importance of VBC, no doubt about it, but I think we have to remember the challenges, defining the outcomes, overcoming insufficient data infrastructure. That's probably what I see the most. Aligning on incentive mechanisms and tracking, and addressing regulatory concerns over data and information sharing. It's important to get that patient consent correct. Again, this is more about the success in the program. We can skip over that. I think we all understand a good VBC will reward all shareholders. It will be a win-win, and it will breed other VBCs. In terms of the most common denominators I see of good VBC programs, or good digital health programs, I should say, they always have an NPS score. They always have some surveys. There's always electronic patient-reported outcomes, daily engagement, and it's never digital by itself. Digital by itself is not a strategy. It's aiming to solve a root cause, take nutrition to tell us over time for the human condition. It's digital plus hardware. It's digital plus human, digital plus coaching, digital plus PT. It's digital plus molecule. And there's other consistent self-reported metrics. But when you're developing a program like this, it's hard to rely on the claims because there's a lag in claims. 3 to 6 months claims run out. And there's a lack of historical clinical evidence because a lot of you guys are generating the clinical evidence for the first time. And you're working with teams like ours for endpoints, for what measures are important as you're thinking about your clinical or decentralized clinical trial. In terms of the VBC pyramid, went over this a couple times, but I can't stress this enough. Get the foundation right. Trust and transparency are mission critical for everything you do. You have to find a business stakeholder, multiple Ps, willing to engage. This is, again, the blueprint. Collaborate with the right partners, find the right market opportunity, set goals, establish benchmarks, evaluate your infrastructure and data capabilities, create that value, capture the value, and then a true win-win strategic collaboration and relationship. You'll breed more alternative payment models. You'll be able to get more and more creative So thank you, and I will open it up to Q&A.
All right, Ty, if you click on the Q&A button, you will see we have a few questions.
Okay. Will we have access to this deck after the call? I think the deck can be edited. It might be limited for some information, but I think you may have access to a deck or the recording. But we can follow up and make sure. Fayola, do you have an idea?
Hi, yes. So after the call, we will definitely send out an email indicating how you can have your questions answered or have access to the deck after. We'll definitely send out an email on that.
Great. It seems that a lot of payers only want upside in the VBC versus shared risk with pharma. I would say that could be right. I haven't seen a lot of at-risk contracts, two-sided or risk-sharing agreements. But those that are often engaged to, risk sharing doesn't happen in year one, so it's more of a 3-year engagement or longer, where you establish year 0 as the benchmarks and the metrics. Then you go into the upside, where the payer will share the upside with the pharma. And then in year 3, once the metrics and data are understood and you have accurate benchmarks, I would not use this year or last year as a benchmark given COVID-19. So I'd use a 2 to 3 year trailing benchmark if you're going to do it, if you're going to look retrospectively. You also create the benchmarks of the program itself. I don't know if the payer or pharma willing to engage in the downside risk. I know when I was at a payer, we looked for two-sided risk contracts. That's what we were most excited about, because we really thought that would impact the 7% inflation level, or on certain RX or pills, much higher than 7% inflation. And again, if you have 7% inflation, the healthcare cost is going to double every 10 years, rule of 72. So we're really trying to protect against that. What's an example of pharma and digital VBC? Any startups doing this? That's a good question, Jen. We work with a lot of startups doing this right now. So if you have a digital program, companion app, combination product, software as a medical device, we're always, for market access or for commercialization, we're always nudging and urging to present that value-based care model with your fee-for-service model. And we're oftentimes seeing a payer or a certain buying department division at the payer is much more excited about that outcomes or that performance reimbursement channel, because they're not really they want to try out this new solution for the first time. The data is not there. They need to collect the data to understand how it's going to impact claims, total cost of care, patient experience. So they're willing to try it out as long as there's payments at risk, or as long as they're only paying for certain performance or outcomes-based measures. They're not just paying based on volume. They're not just paying based on intensity. They're not paying for the program even if it fails. You have to achieve certain milestones. And that's when you start engaging in these conversations and these contractual, when you're in the trenches, that's when the conversations get interesting. But that's when you can really build rapport, you can build trust, and you can build transparency in the system. And I think that's the opportunity that digital health is really creating, because digital health, digital therapeutics, digital medicine is certainly transforming healthcare as we know it. So why wouldn't we transform the reimbursement channel and models? We can't keep giving legislation that focuses on proven breakthrough devices, but then forcing them into traditional reimbursement pathways. That's why this value-based care arrangement is so exciting, because if a payer doesn't allow doulas for their benefits, oftentimes those benefits are tied to fee-for-service reimbursement. But if they offer this new value-based care program, they can offer new benefits, new patient experiences. What is your personal view at medullan related to completely different payment model, the so-called social impact bonds, which have gained some popularity in the UK and will soon be introduced by a group of disruptive innovators in mainland Europe? Where I think maybe Europe is ahead, but in terms of what we're doing with the Medicaid population, that's something I'm excited about. But I'm not sure what everything that would entail a social impact bond. I would have to understand that more to really speak to that. But I'll take that as a note and a takeaway. I can follow up on that. I am Alethea. I am curious as to your thoughts on the ease of working with policymakers. The poll hinted at payer and pharma being hardest to work with. The policymakers and translation of best practices into policy in the face of substantial evidence is equally as difficult, I think. And I think that's right. Time and time again, not only do you have to prove the business case, you have to show the evidence, bring the data points for why the policy needs to change. I think it's an eternal uphill battle. I think the policy for digital health is woefully behind. Sometimes they go way too quick. Sometimes they get it wrong completely. But they're learning. And I know there's a lot of smart people dedicated to the cause. I speak with them every day. But I do agree that they are a very hard crowd to work with when it comes to understanding how healthcare is transforming and the opportunity for digital health. Great. Are there any other questions? Viola, did you want to close with any commentary before I close the program?
No, I think that if anyone has any further questions, when we send out the follow-up email, you guys can ask your questions then, and Ty will definitely get back to you. You have the floor,
Yeah,
Ty.
so thanks. Just want to again thank everybody for joining today. Just the amount of registrants, we had over 80, and the amount of participants, I think we might have hit 50 at some point. It is just amazing to see. If you have any questions or you want to do any follow-up, my email's on the screen. You can go to medullan.com. You can engage with us on LinkedIn or any of our social media channels. We're happy to talk with you further about any of the concepts, whether you're thinking about market access, whether you're thinking about commercialization, whether you're still in the R&D or the blue ocean ideating aspect of your beyond the pill solution. We're working on a number of interesting initiatives this year, and would love to work with you as a collaborator, as a partner, as a client. Thank you, Claire. And with that, again, thank you. Thank you all for showing up, spending an hour of your day with us. I know everyone here is super, uber busy, and I really enjoyed this, and I hope you do it again.